That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. I was listening to the radio the other day. They just contracted to pay one player on one team $6 million a year. Can you believe this?
And why is that?
It's the Roman Circus. What does the emperor do when the people become restive, and when the people are asking questions, and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor? He sends them to the circus. He creates a circus. He builds a giant coliseum. And he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races and football games and basketball games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world, so that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is, so they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they're being manipulated, so they don't ever question the emperor. That's why they pay a player on a football team or a baseball team $1 million or $2 million or $3 million a year. It is the Roman Circus. I know men who don't know anything in the world except who plays third base for the Mets. And they think that's a great accomplishment. And they meet and pat each other on the back and bond and go have cocktails and talk about what this guy that plays third base for the Mets did in last night's game. It's sad. It's really sad.
Is there any room in a kind of society where these manipulations are not taking place for this type of entertainment, or any type of entertainment at all?
If people understand that a game is a game, if people understand that nobody, no matter what they do, is worth paying $2 or $3 million a year for, people should be able to get rich if they want to, by the sweat of their individual labor. Okay? By going out and doing something for the world. Not by taking people's minds away from the emperor. It's a game. Football's a game. Football's a game. But let me tell you something. When 150 of the most powerful men and women in the world can meet in secret in Baden-Baden, Germany, and plot the fate of billions, and nobody even cares about it, but 6 football players go to lunch together, and it's in the headlines across the country, you have a reflection of the society in which that exists. And it is a sick, sick society that is doomed to self-destruction.
For sports, for instance, now at that time, sports was something that children, school children were into. Adults became adults and got onto adult things. So it was unimaginable at the time that people could actually believe that there was even a need for adult sports and entertainment, never mind having arenas built across the world. But he said we can do this, and voiced basically a sports culture for the males. Using a tribal system, we're all tribal to an extent. That's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood. That's why we're supplied with these leaders. And because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny as the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet, basically, gradually becoming helpless as males through sports. Therefore they'd have a tribal team they could identify with, they could cheer them on as they were winning. In their own personal lives, they were getting nowhere. They were getting disenfranchised, in a sense, as experts took over decision making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use, planned before they even implemented the sports. When radio came along, of course, they used that to the maximum. Sports for the men, soaps basically for the women, and then in came television, as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state. And sure enough, around the 1960s, really, 50s and 60s, it took off. It really, really took off. And men became glued on Saturday nights to the sports shows. A culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry. The Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. Their actors and directors were called the cultural leaders, because they would, like a computer, people are like computers, all you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call it political correctness. Most people want to belong to their peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their neighbours and friends who will answer back and agree on these same topics in kind. It doesn't matter if the topics or what you're given are facts or utter nonsense, as long as everyone agrees at the same time. You'll say, well, I'm sane, and your friends will all agree because they've had the same information given to them.
But they've been programmed, and I'm sad because I know that it's hard for people like that to take an interest, a serious interest in world affairs, to take a serious interest in what their elected officials are doing. And they're not going to be really inclined to study or discover the deception that's being used against them. And so I'm sad because I see all of that in a flash in my mind as being an indication of how easy it is for the masses to be manipulated.
Get them away from things that matter. And for that, it's important to reduce their capacity to think.
The sports section is handled in another special department. The sports reporter must be a specialist in his knowledge of sports. He gets his story right at the sporting event and often sends it into his paper play by play.
Take, say, sports. That's another crucial example of the indoctrination system, in my view. For one thing, because it offers people something to pay attention to that's of no importance. That keeps them from worrying about, keeps them from worrying about things that matter to their lives that they might have some idea about doing something about. And in fact, it's striking to see the intelligence that's used by ordinary people in sports. I mean, you listen to radio stations where people call in. They have the most exotic information and understanding about, all kind of arcane issues. And the press undoubtedly does a lot with this. I remember in high school already, I was pretty old, I suddenly asked myself at one point, why do I care if my high school team wins the football game? I mean, I don't know anybody on the team, I mean, they have nothing to do with me. I mean, why am I cheering for my team? It doesn't make any sense, But the point is, it does make sense. It's a way of building up irrational attitudes of submission to authority and, group cohesion behind, leadership elements. In fact, it's training in irrational jingoism. That's also a feature of competitive sports. I think if you look closely at these things, I think typically they do have functions. And that's why energy is devoted to supporting them and creating a basis for them, and advertisers are willing to pay for them and so on.
The NFL and the game last night had commercials that were politicized from top to bottom throughout the whole thing. And you saw these globalist PC advertisements all over the place. It was just nonsense. And
Rule number 1, corrupt the young, get them away from religion. Rule number 2, break down the moral virtues. Rule number 3, encourage a soft government attitude toward crime. Number 4, divide the people into hostile groups. Number 5, get the people's minds off their government. Focus their attention on athletics or sex. Did you know in 1896 there were only 311 athletes in the Olympics? 100 years later, there were 13,000 athletes in the Olympics. How many channels on TV now are devoted to athletics? How much money is spent in America on sports? If you consider all things involved, transportation to and from, buying the property, building the buildings. Folks, it's many, many, many billions and billions of dollars. So somebody can knock a ball into a hole in the dirt. Athletics has taken over our thinking process. Here's an advertisement for a 50-inch TV. It says, football is a religion. Build a nice church.
Then it is again, I hear the words of Professor Chomsky echoing in my mind that sports ball helps get these people out of the way. It helps motivate all of their instinctual energy behind things like soccer and exotic information that doesn't matter in any real way to their lives, as it channels their thoughts away from worrying about things that matter to their lives and that they might have some idea about doing something about.